regard to being proactive. I would urge the school board to call an emergency, condemn the building today, and then let us all get to work on getting the funding to fund the alternatives. I've been speaking with representatives at the state, the county, and the federal level, and I know there is funding available if this board would call an emergency and make the right move. The suspicion that there is something festering in that school building should be a strong enough issue to condemn that building. But I do think, as articulated by the previous speakers, that we have more than enough proof already. We don't need additional proof. We have proof. We have benzene. It causes blood cancer. My dad died of cancer. They said his environment was safe. They learned 25 years later that it was in his environment that killed him. I am fighting for my daughter, but I have an alternative for my daughter. There are people in the school district that don't have the ability to have the alternatives that I have. I'm fighting for those children and those families. Please, school board, please have the will and the courage. Call an emergency and condemn this building today, please. Thank you.
Thank you. And followed by Adrian Esposito.
I would like to acknowledge the efforts of the Board of Ed and Dr. Gianni in providing alternatives for this difficult situation. It's unfortunate that the current Board of Ed has had to inherit this decades-old issue of the safety of Frank P. Long, along with the parents, students, and teachers experiencing this same thing alongside of you. But we can no longer ignore that test after test continues to show elevated levels of one toxin or another. Guidelines are just that. The word guideline, by definition, is recommended practice that allows some direction or leeway in its interpretation, implementation, or use. Keyword, interpretation. The testing is not consistent, nor does it use a baseline year over year, and we do not have any testing from the other schools in the district to make a comparison. That, along with the physical fact that Frank P. Long is right in the middle of a landfill, an asphalt manufacturing plant, an automotive holding area, and composting site, makes the current school location a bullseye for a multitude of toxic possibilities. Couple that with the health issues, even deaths, described by students, parents, and teachers over the years, as well as those closest to the landfill, must give one pause that this is not, quote-unquote, mass hysteria, as some have deemed, but an intelligent, knowledgeable, and responsible concern of our community. The saying, where there is smoke, there is fire, we can translate to, where there is a garbage landfill, there are toxins. History and well-publicized cases of this has been proved time and time again from history of other landfills that are on Long Island and across the country. The concerned citizens here tonight are not only just worried about our children, our teachers, and our staff that work at Frank P. Long. We are here too because we are concerned about the children and staff yet to come to Frank P. Long. Knowing what we know and admitting what we don't know, we can no longer pass this issue on to the next up-and-coming future generations as it has been passed to us. The buck must stop here. We owe it to our fellow neighbors, and you owe it to us as the people that to represent our voices and our concerns. Be the Board of Ed that shows compassion, empathy, and a conscience. Will the next step be easy? No. Not for the parents, the teachers, the students, and not for the Board of Ed either. But the first step has to happen sometime, and that time is now. Frank P. Long needs to be closed. How that happens will hopefully be an open dialogue and team effort of all that are here now. So let's be the change together. You know it's the right thing, so please do the right thing. Thank you.
Adrian Esposito, followed by Daniel Mascalero. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Good evening, members of the board. My name is Adrian Esposito. I'm the Executive Director of Citizens Campaign for the Environment. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I also want to thank the board for your attentiveness to this matter, and we know it's a very serious one. And I do think the board's been working to do your due diligence by hiring in bioscience and doing air quality testing. But I do want to make some, I think, specific comments on Vital Science report, both in 2016 and 2017. I'm very disappointed that they, for instance, did not take those tests in the winter. That's when you're supposed to take air quality, indoor air quality testing, when the windows are closed, when the concentrations would be highest. They unfortunately took them in the summer. Also, if you're going to capture emissions coming from the landfill, those tests should have been taken when the wind was out of the north and the northwest. Unfortunately, in 2016, the wind was out of the west-northwest. I said that opposite, I'm sorry. The wind was in the opposite direction. So, in other words, we're not going to be able to capture whether it's VOCs or even particulate matter, if we're taking those tests, and this should have been known by EnviroScience, it should have been standard operating procedure. The wind should have been in the direction of the school, not blowing away from the school. That was a common sense thing that they missed. Also, the canisters should have been in operation for 8 hours, not 1 hour. 1 hour is a snapshot of time. It's not a meaningful enough substantive test to really illustrate and capture these VOCs and other contaminants that exist. So the bottom line is we have grave concerns about you relying on the EnviroScience data, although, as was stated previously, there are almost 24 volatile organic chemicals that were captured. We know from the DEC reports and from tests that were paid for by the town of Brookhaven, who seems to not want to talk about this issue, that benzene has been found from the landfill, and the fingerprint has been clear, coming into the school. That's a scientific fact. We've asked many times that particulate matter, particularly fine particulate matter, that's less than 2.5 microns, be tested for at the school. I don't know if you actually did that. I testified in front of the board a month ago. That has not occurred yet. That's unfortunate. That's a very serious health threat, causing respiratory ailments and breathing ailments and heart disease. So my bottom line to you is that when you have a school next to a landfill, it is never a good combination. Landfills are well established in the scientific literature to have VOCs, particulate matter, odors, hydrogen sulfide, and other health ailments, chemicals coming from them. It's not your fault. No one's blaming you. That's the way it is. It's a 276-foot mountain of ash and decaying debris, and it's going to impact the school. I'm going to say to you, you should be working with the town to close the landfill and solve all of the community's problems, not just this.
All right, we have Danielle Mascalero. Did I pronounce that correctly? Okay. And on deck would be Lena, Mike?
Lena Maisner.
What is it?
Lena Maisner.
Lena Maisner. All right, you're on deck.
Okay. So thank you for having me. I didn't know it was coming. I'm upset about all this going on. I just think bottom line is we need to close plain and simple. It's not an argument. It just needs to get done. None of us here know the effects of environmental endocrine disruptors, which some of these toxins are, and what they do to children. And nobody can say 20, 50 years from now what the effects are going to be on these children because they attended your school. My son has a pineal region mass. He has abnormal labs, and he's followed by neuro, endo, hematology, oncology, and his testosterone level is triple of what an adult male would be at 9 years old. It's about 10. Bottom line is he went to Frankie Long, and I don't know if this is connected to that, but what I do know is that it's a fearful thing for any parent to know that your child has something going on in their brain, and if this is related to that, I would hate to see other people have to deal with what I'm dealing with. It's not acceptable. All of you are sitting here, and that's great. The thing is that you just need to close the school. You shouldn't even ask about it and just figure out what you're going to do. Because there's more than, I know of my son, but there's other people that have the same symptoms, and it's not acceptable. It's scary.
How old is your son at this time?
My son's 12 now, and he has He went into precocious puberty way too early, and now he has an implant in his arm to slow it down. But we can't figure out what caused that. So what I'm saying to you is that we don't know what these toxins can do on these children, and you need to just stop. Just close it, do something, pull Trump, I don't know, do something.
I'm sorry, before you begin. On deck would be Erica Watson. Okay, begin.
Hi, thanks. I'm not going to sit here and talk about cancer because everybody knows it, but I'm going to talk about the school's options. Frank P. needs to be closed down. I'm outraged to send into a school with asbestos, pesticide, mold. Unfortunately, I also can't afford private school. This leaves me and other parents with limited options. About your 10 options, option 1 and 2, increasing class size and decreasing staff is not helping anybody. There are too many children that require extra help as it is. My daughter was one of them. In a class of 30 kids or more, she would never have made it to 3rd grade. She can barely read. Cutting out kindergarten would make this even worse. I can't afford to put my son into private kindergarten, and you would be condemning a lot of children to start 1st grade with less education and more work for the teachers. On top of kids get other kids sick, parents send their children to school while sick, hoping it will go unnoticed because kids are too young to stay home by themselves, and the parents can't take the time off work or can't find someone to watch their children. It's hard enough to keep children healthy in a classroom of 16 to 24 kids. Option number 3, shortening kids' learning time is not good in general. A lot of parents depend on extracurricular sports and clubs to make be able to work and have their jobs, or their daycare less. For parents that can't afford local aftercare programs or now daycare programs for 4th and 5th graders, this will be significant on whether or not they can keep their jobs. I work at the local bank. I've worked there for 4 years. I would have to quit my job completely to be able to send both of them. I've got 3 children. They would be in all different times. I would have to completely quit my job. This is not the age of my parents. We had to walk uphill 12 miles in snow to get to school. If I had to leave my daughter at home from 8 o'clock in the morning to 12 o'clock to get herself on the bus, lock up the house, and everything, somebody's going to call CPS on me. I can't do it. I'd have to quit my job. Option number 4, if the bus ride is a little longer, at least all the classes won't get maxed out and the kids can get the attention they need. Option 5 and 6, I don't understand why moving costs would be $37,000 when moving into the elementary schools would be $5,000. But maybe some of those costs can be offset by parents or anybody in the district that would be willing to donate some time to help move the schools. Somebody's laughing. I would donate my Sundays to help offset the cost of moving the heat filter system sounds good, but it's a Band-Aid. It's not fixing the problems. In 2 to 3 years, my middle child will be in and out of Frank P. It's not going to save you from breathing any of the garbage there, and for a Band-Aid, it's more expensive than some of the other options that are quicker and safer. Options 8, 9, and 10. Good ideas, very expensive, too long a time to fix the problem. My kids will be in and out. It's not saving anybody. It's just not helping. Please we gotta close the school. Please don't put the kids and staff in danger anymore. It's just not worth it. Did not miss a single day of school.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing. Before you begin, Erica, this is Erica?
Yes.
Okay. Followed by Wayne White.
Thank you for hearing me tonight. I teach at Berkowitz. I taught there for 3 years. Prior to that, I taught at Frankie Home for 15 years. I've been asked to read a letter to you tonight. You've heard from many of the teachers who are dealing with illnesses, and this letter is from a doctor who's been treating some of them. To whom it may concern, autoimmune disease is a condition which occurs when the immune system attacks the body's own tissues and organs. Autoimmune diseases are now recognized as among the leading causes of death among young and middle-aged women in the United States. Prevalence rates cases are rising and are thought to be largely due to environmental reasons. Our gene sequences are not changing fast enough to account for this change. Of note, there are at least 80,000 chemicals produced commercially today. There is some evidence, although not completely proven yet, that there may be a link between these chemical agents and autoimmune disorders. Certainly, more environmental studies need to be done to ascertain if there is a relationship or not. There are many research articles which raise these questions and support a possible causal relationship between autoimmune diseases and exposure to environmental toxins. These particular questions are raised with the current situation at the local school in Belfort and the remarkable number of students, teachers, and other staff reporting unexplained symptoms, some of which may indicate an autoimmune disease or possible toxin exposure, which may correlate to the proximity of the nearby dump site. Several of the employees from the school are now my patients and are being evaluated and or treated for various conditions that are likely autoimmune in nature. I am certainly concerned about the reported toxic exposures and whether there may be a correlation to my patients' complaints. I will certainly follow this story with interest as all concerned parties seek to find answers. Sincerely, Roy Prashad, D.O., Fellow of the American College of Rheumatology.
Do you have a copy of that for us? Thank you so much. Wayne White, followed by Chris Siervo.
Good evening. First, I want to thank you, the board, for addressing these concerns in the meeting way. These issues have been around for decades, as somebody has mentioned before, and we have seen significant movement from you in trying to end the health crisis at Frank P. Law. So first of all, thank you. As a union leader, I was elected to protect my members, but we are all teachers, and by nature, we are caretakers and caregivers. The health and safety for your children, who are our children, is of utmost importance. Some of us who are ill will still come into school to take care of all of our collective children. But this is just beyond teachers and students. We want the best health and safety for our community of caregivers, and that also means our administrators, our TAs, secretaries, custodians, and everyone working in the district, as well as we want the best for all of those who are downwind of the dump from Atlantic Point to North Bellport, as well as health housing, and all people who may have a limited say. We have been discussing with Dr. Gianni and the board about the situation, and hopefully, I believe that everyone has received our presentation. I know EnviroScience and other firms will give you the quantitative data, but what's missing is the qualitative data. And what we gave you was somewhat the potential correlations of VOCs with illnesses like Frank P. Long. We want you to have the qualitative data, which we have worked very hard to collect. And with that being said, I want to publicly thank Ms. Calero, Ms. Galina, Mrs. Havens, and Mr. Tora for working hard on their own time without compensation. Please take a look at the number of documented illnesses within the building from the teaching staff. That was part of a survey from current and past ETA members. This was a part of their work that was very difficult because it's very difficult to gather qualitative data from also the community and the students. I am asking that studies, you can't do it, but at least studies be done in the communities and with the students to show the effects that the landfill has had on our friends and family in the district. As Erica just mentioned, even doctors are dealing with some of our members with autoimmune conditions from teachers in Frank Law. And it kind of reminds me of low levels of exposure, such as the book Flowers in the Attic, where the children were exposed to low levels of arsenic for a long period of time, which in the long run has many significant effects. Now, the hard part, actually before I say that, We actually have discussed with NICET and NIOSH the situation. Under EPA standards, Frank Long falls under the sick building syndrome, and this is for the second time. The first was in 1989. Now, just wrapping it up, I know it's hard for you to do, and when it comes to proof, it's difficult, because even the 9/11 responders, where we knew it was wrong, took 15 years to solve, but we just want to make sure that I have faith in you that you feel the best way to treat our students, our staff, and our community. And we don't want any detriment to the educational process in this community, nor do we want job loss at any level.
Yep.
We just want to make sure that we are safe and we are there to take care of the students, and that this Frank Long solution is solved as fast as possible, because it's been too long, and we want the best for all of the members of our community. Thank you.
Are you Chris? Okay. 30 minutes. So 30 minutes are up? Okay, thank you. All right, the 30 minutes are up for the public portion. Is there a motion and a second to extend it for 15 minutes? Trustee DeSanto, seconded by Vice President Hunt. All those in favor, raise your hand by saying aye. Okay, we will, there's no opposed, unanimous, and we will extend for another 15 minutes. Okay, Chris?
And I'll be brief.
And just Adele Mickelson, if you could be on deck.
Good evening, members of the board. My name is Chris Ciervo. I've been a member of the Hamlet now for 25 years, and we've sent 2 kids to the district. I've got a quick question, and it was raised earlier by a few of the guest speakers here this evening regarding the study that was done by EnviroScience on December 28th of 2015, where it was recommended that the volatile organic compound 1,2-dichlorpropane was elevated. And it was recommended as part of that report that the testing be redone during the peak heating periods, January, February of that year. And my question is simply, why wasn't it done? And if there's an answer to that, I would greatly appreciate understanding what that answer is. And I know that since the last board meeting, there was going to be another test done by EnviroScience it was a more involved test. I think it was more of a limited test back in December. I think there was going to be 60 somewhat locations that were going to be tested in the school this last go around. And calling into question, I think Adrian raised a good point about the 1-hour test that was done back in December 2015 was really just a very small snapshot of what potentially can be collected in these canisters. I myself am doing air quality assessments at a much lower scale than EnviroScience, but I do know well enough that 1 hour's time is not a long time. 8 hours, I would even argue that canister needs to be open for 24 hours in an environment under conditions where the VOCs are likely to basically evaporate, or should I say vaporize into the air and rise. So that's my comment for this evening, and I'm hoping that we can get some answers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Adele Mickelson, and next would be Danny Infante.
Good evening, everyone. I wasn't going to speak tonight because you guys heard my story last meeting. I just have 2 points to share this evening. After going home from the board of that meeting last time, within 24 hours, I had friends contact me that lived in the community, and within 24 hours, I had a list of at least 15 names of people who had died of cancer, had MS with no family history, as well as other health issues, just from living on Pace Avenue and Belfort Avenue. I know that's not the problem with the school board, but it adds to the compilation that it's both a community issue as well as the school issue, and links to the connection with the dump. The other thing was that this afternoon, one of the parents suggested in the Facebook South Country Mom members that work at the administration building, they called us crazy, they called us passionate, they called us emotional. If they don't want to go work in that building, but they want us to send our kids there and send teachers there, it's just, like, I have no words. I keep saying to myself, Del, this is not your fight. Your kid is out of there. Like, I don't have kids that are going to go to Franklin Home. But I went through hell the last 2 years with my daughter and her health, and the doctors said they didn't know what was wrong with her. They were asking about toxins. Is she exposed to toxins? And I had nurses at the school and the administration at the school who looked me in my face and said, "Oh, we're so sorry you're going through this. I hope you find some answers." But they knew there were teachers sick there. They knew there were students sick there. And nobody said a word. I had to find out in May on the news that my daughter's neurological issues could possibly be connected to the poisoning at the dump at the end of school. That's what I have to say for
Are you willing to share how your daughter is doing now?
She is seizure-free so far. It's been a year. She's on medication for the rest of her life. So it's, it's a toss-up. We're okay for now, but it's every day we don't know what's going to happen. She can outgrow her dose and have another seizure.
Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing. All right, Danny's up now, and then A. Pointer.
I'm a bender, I'm a Ponta.
You're Bender and Pointer?
Yeah, I'm married to Ponta. So I'm Bender.
Thanks for clarifying.
Good evening. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. This is a letter that was submitted by my son's pediatrician. I believe just about everybody here received a copy.
Okay.
I'm sorry, who was the letter from?
It's from my son's pediatrician.
Okay, and it's out in the audience?
Yep.
Has a copy been given to the district clerk?
No, but I'll give you a copy when I read this.
Sure.
Okay. And I got my son's name out of this, but this is from the pediatrician. This is what they wrote. I wanted to read this to you.
I'll post the letter later.
I'm writing this letter on behalf of my son. It has come to my attention that Frank Blue Long School is being investigated for safety because of its proximity excuse me, to Yaphank Town Health Brookhaven landfill. This is information provided by the EnviroScience Consultants report in June 2016 and was provided for her review. As you know, the investigation found higher than normal levels of methylene chloride and benzene in the air, in and around the school. Occupational Health and Safety Administration and the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health considered methylene chloride, benzene to be potential carcinogens. Short-term exposure to high concentrations of methylene chloride may cause mental confusion, lightheadedness, nausea, vomiting, and headache. Continued exposure may also cause eye and respiratory tract irritation. Benzene is a component of products derived from coal and petroleum and is found in gasoline and other fuels. Benzene is also used to manufacture plastics, detergents, pesticides, and other chemicals. OSHA reports with exposures from less than 5 years to more than 30 years, individuals have developed and died from leukemia. Long-term exposure may affect bone marrow, blood production. Short-term exposure may short-term exposures to high levels of benzene may cause drowsiness, dizziness, unconsciousness, or death. She finds it very interesting that the wind was blowing away from the school and the landfill the day of the investigation was done. She writes, "I am aware of any repeat testing on that day in which the wind was blowing toward the school from the landfill. I'd be interested in those results if available." And after hearing about the story, I have personally driven to the school to see how close it is to the landfill. I honestly cannot believe it has been allowed to operate this long. What is even more bothersome is that the Martha Avenue playground and sports field that are located even closer to the landfill than the school. How is this considered to be safe for children? As stated, the potential for harm by exposure to carcinogens is well known. My professional opinion is that these children are being put in harm's way by continuing to have them attend the school at its current location. The exposure day to day at such a crucial time in their growth and development is very concerning. I sincerely hope for the safety of my son, with children and school personnel, that this school is relocated to a safer environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Pointer-Bender, if you could just hold on before you begin, I have a question.
What are they discussing? Somebody's car. Maybe it's your car. My thought is that.
I'm sorry, Ms. Bennett.
Hi, no problem. Thank you for letting me speak. Originally, when I was coming up here this evening, I was going to tell you about my daughter who was adopted from China at 10 months old. And when my husband and I brought her home, she had a very high level of lead in her body. She also had melamine because the Chinese were putting it in the food because it was cheaper. And when she came home, they made more money that way. And when she came home, we had to free her body of the lead, free her body of the melamine. She's perfectly healthy somewhere up in the back right now. And I wanted to tell you that because we brought her home healthy, we made her healthy, and we put her in a school that we believe made her safe. But I'm not going to go into that story because a friend of mine who can't be here this evening, who you all know, Caroline Wilkinson, is right now on her 8th day in Stony Brook Hospital with her son James. Caroline has gone to over 20 doctors and specialists.
If I just may, do you have permission to share Caroline's
I do,
story?
in fact.
Okay.
She's probably listening right now.
Okay.
She has provided me with this information, which I'd like to share with you.
Okay.
Dr. Harold Ziegler, who is a president and forensic chemist for Forcon International, he has a resume that bullet points is 2 pages. I couldn't even read it to you in the interest of time, but I will read you his correspondence to Caroline. And he said, "Hello to you, Caroline. From what you report, your son has experienced dermal, digestive, and neurological symptoms. It appears that he has been sensitized to the chemicals he was exposed to and has developed systemic sensitization, meaning that symptoms develop in areas of the body not directly exposed to the offending agents. Sensitized people remain affected by very low concentrations of toxic chemicals, ones that do not affect others." So that means some are susceptible, as James says. "The fact that people other than your son have experienced symptoms that are different from your son's is consistent with ongoing exposure to toxic chemicals, as the same toxic chemicals can attack different body sites in different people. I have published several papers and books on the subject, and there is quite a bit of other literature as well. The first line of attack is, as you have done, remove the affected person from continued exposure. As for treatment to alleviate the symptoms, there are doctors who offer treatment. I have carried out research with one of these doctors, and with your permission, will forward your email to him and inquire whether he can see your son. Kindly email back your permission if this is okay with you. If so, I will forward the information to him. As to the data that has been collected, could you please forward what you have and include information about others who have been affected to me so I can have a look at it all? Also, with the landfill, is the landfill a municipal or a toxic waste dump site? If a municipal one, is there any record of illegal dumping of toxic chemicals in it? The cost of carrying out a thorough investigation is very high and can run into hundreds of thousands of dollars. Such investigations, however, are usually carried out by government entities, and their results are available to all. I look forward to hearing from you again. At this point, please understand that I will not bill you at this time. I would like to continue one more. Caroline. Caroline, I have reviewed the material once she forwarded everything to him. Now keep in mind, she has also seen a team of neurosurgeons Asperger's, autoimmune, you name them, she's seen them. They're now working all together. From Stony Brook into Mount Sinai in New York, now they're talking to somebody in Texas. Caroline, I have reviewed the material forwarded. Before discussing this, the first and foremost thing is your son's health. Mount Sinai Hospital is mentioned in the documents. They have an excellent environmental health department. I suggest that you contact them and have your son evaluated by an environmental toxicologist. Among other physicians in the department, I also suggest you contact Dr. William Ray, and he gave this information. Dr. Ray knows me. We have carried out research together, so please tell him that I referred you. You can learn about the Environmental Health Center by Googling it. One, the analytical data show that shows that there have been chemicals there for a while, as there are decomposition products of some of the primary chemicals. Two, there is at least one other source of toxic chemicals, the asperger plant. Three, the proliferation of numerous cancers is an indication of chemical exposures. Four, the presence of disease clusters is very indicative of chemical exposure. All of these need to be carefully investigated. If you have not already done so, you might want to consider contacting an attorney. If you retain one, I will be happy to her. All my best to your son, Harold. Again, Caroline is not here because her son is too sick right now and she can't leave his bedside in Stony Brook. But she just texted me while I'm here, and she said, my son is listening with me. And he said, hey Mom, why didn't they close the school when people first heard other people were getting sick? And I said, I don't know. He said, it's just not right, it doesn't make sense. So if you are concerned that further testing needs to be done, that's your answer. If you think the building is on fire, you don't send 690 children into that building. You find out first if something's on fire.
Okay, thank you very much. Another 15 minutes, okay. We have just two more parts. I just have to ask a quick question of Jacqueline. Jacqueline, who signed up, could you raise your hand? There you are, okay. You're asking, the topic, is the topic related to the agenda item, Frankie Law, or is it not agenda? To the community, okay. Okay, so then you're gonna be on deck. We'll take you now. And Mr. Slaughter, are you here? Could you step forward for a minute while Ms. Huffine comes up to speak? And then Jacqueline, you'll be next.
Okay. Nice. I love that. Yes, awesome.
Good evening, all of my past board member friends. I am speaking right now this minute as a past board member. I was appalled by what was put up on the website, that the school, if in fact we had to close the school, that we would have no kindergarten, and that 31 teachers would lose their job. I'm appalled by that. I'm ashamed of it. How dare you do that? Say that.
Yes.
We just have to clarify something. The options that were put forward were based on a number of recommendations. Doesn't mean that the board endorses any one of them at this time. But your feelings are important to us.
As a past administrator, we'd never put that up. Never, never. There are other positive things you could do. Talk about the stuff you're doing. Speaking to people who are retired and were administrators, the fact came out to me that, hello, the board should be proving to the public that the buildings are safe, not the public proving that the building is unsafe.
Yes. Amen.
I asked the teachers to think about this, and the president, teachers should report to work, but not go in the building, because the building is not safe. That's what I would say to them. And please don't use the state education giving okay approval to close the school as an excuse. I talked to people, one phone call, the state is never going to refuse you because they know they'll have a law case on their side. So that's not an excuse. Take that off, all right? It's not going to take any time at all. If you want to do it, it will happen. The standards that are set for what's acceptable and not are set by whom? By the state. We all trust what the state says, right? Like with tobacco, with the opiates, right? The fact that they know what they're doing. Well, it's so scarce and it's led by lobbyists. We know that. They make the standards. Come on, guys. So are we going to expose our children, our staff, to that? Based on what? By standards set by a government who takes 20 years to develop the correct standard. That's not okay. The other thing is, this board should be pressuring New York Town. Because
yes. Yes.
They should be paying for it too.
Yep.
And having worked on the budget, okay, all last year, there's enough money in that budget if you just cut the right things.
Jacqueline, how do you pronounce your last name, please?
Nice job. They'll probably have a lawsuit against me. Exciting about it. Oh, please. That was awesome.
And
Lower the mic a little bit and speak into it.
I'm a member of the community, and my two children went to Fountain. My two girls. I worked in the shelter in the corner for Fountain for 4 years. I have been diagnosed with Crohn's disease, which doesn't run in my family. The first one, all my family, medical history, which I know very well, there's no Crohn's. I just received a phone call from my daughter's doctor today. She's having hormonal issues. We never had that in my family. She just came from Long. She's going to 7th grade, and something is going on with her metabolism. And I'm worried because she's friends with the family mentioned before here. And we're being very close. That's what I came here for the meetings. And by studying all the things that they have posed, I find out that probably my Crohn's, that has been very suffering for me for a few years. Now it's controlled, but it was being, I thought I had cancer, came from there. And as well as I don't longer work there, but I feel for the people who has to go to work, to have to spend 7 hours in a place doing what they're supposed to do their job, and you bringing the disease to yourself and or your children in the case. Now I'm worried about my daughter, and I received a diagnosis today. I don't know what the doctor's going to tell me. And I have a friend who has a child in the hospital, as you heard before, and it's very scary. My daughter has a girlfriend that her boyfriend lives in the community and nearby, and now he's being that 22-year-old man. He's been diagnosed with stage of lung cancer, and he lives in the community. It's you fear for things like that. Yes, I just want to let you know that it's not directed to front alone. It's happening in the community.
Thank you very much. Next we have Josh Slaughter on behalf of legislator Kate Browning, who is the legislator of the district and houses our school district, and followed by our last card for Barbara Schatzman.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. On behalf of Legislator Kate Browning, I'm her chief of staff. She apologizes that she couldn't be here. But I do want to start out by just thanking the school board because you have a tough decision. A large burden has been placed on your shoulders, and I think you've done it in an open and transparent process. And I know you're working hard to make a decision based on science, and so I definitely applaud you for the way you have approached a difficult situation. The county health department has brought forth their resources to try and assist. We do need to make sure that we prove what's going on here so that decisions are made on science and not emotions, but clearly there's more going on here that we need to get to the bottom of. And our health department doesn't necessarily have the tools to do the type of testing that needs to be done, but I know they've met with our office, teachers, and some of the school board here to discuss what they can do, and they have since reached out to the state health department to ask that they come in and do the necessary testing to look at these illnesses and if there is a connection to the landfill. So we will continue to offer our assistance in that regard. But at the end of the day, regardless of what your decision is, this school does not operate in a bubble, and if it is determined to truly be connected to the landfill and there's health concerns, we have to worry about the surrounding community as well. Many of these children and families not only attend the school, but they live in the community, so they are still impacted, and we have to address it beyond the school district. So the fact that our town officials are not here is disappointing.
Very.
And I think we need to reach out. It's fair that this burden is falling solely on you, and you're taking on the brunt of this challenge. So, we're more than happy to reach out to the town and bring them to the table to sit down with the school district because we need a long-term plan for this landfill. And if you close the school, this will not go away. This issue is not going away. And whatever we can do to help, feel free to reach out. We're happy to bring the town to the table so we can have a long-term plan.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Just to that point, some of you may know in my former life I worked for Suffolk County, and I served as the union president for a number of years. And I went up against the county on issues of staffing. And one of the issues that is a problem with the county, which Ms. Browning has been a long advocate for the workers in Suffolk County. But if you could just bring back to her and to the rest of the legislature that doing more with less in Suffolk County hasn't worked, and the air quality division that used to be in the health department is no longer there. No one staffs it, and that's wrong, and that has to change. So if you could bring that up.
Yes. All right, Cheryl.
And finally, Barbara Schatzman. Where's Ms. Schatzman? Okay.
Those of you who know me will see in the audience, I'm sitting at the board table. I have no intentions of speaking tonight. I've said that many times, but I just cannot leave without saying something. I've been a resident of the district for 38 years. My 2 children and 2 grown children have gone through the school district. My grandchild is now a student at Franklin School. I was a teacher at Brookhaven for 24 years. I was a board member for 9 years, once I passed board president. I was also in the BTA, the chairperson of the Health and Safety Committee. At that time, one of the concentrations was the problems that the teachers and staff members and children were having at Brookhaven School, with sinus infections, headaches. I had second graders who were suffering with migraines that were going on. And it took a long time and a lot of effort. I was put on notice by a former superintendent not to bring it up at any more board meetings. I was put on notice not to write any more letters to him, which I then employed by writing a 5-page letter to him, because you don't check your rights at the schoolhouse door, so everybody please remember that. You don't check your rights at the schoolhouse door.
Yeah, Gianni.
I was told there was no problems. Finally, something was done, but it was only done when the parents got involved. Nobody listened to the teachers. Nobody listened to all the facts I was presenting. Nobody listened to the surveys I brought until the parents got involved. At that time, it was found that all the outside vents were covered with plastic. There was no fresh air coming into the buildings.
God, they're
The
idiots.
HVAC units were never cleaned, never. The ductwork was filthy. And there was a bond project that went through to help alleviate that problem. But it didn't only affect Brookhaven, it affected the other schools, because they found out things weren't done in the other schools too. So I don't envy your position sitting over there. I know what it's like. I've been through initiation by fire on this board also. But the one group of people that haven't been recognized as being a very important group here are the parents and grandparents of the students that are going to that school. And I want to commend them and encourage them to keep speaking. Talk your mind, speak your mind, get the information presented to the board. They do not have an easy job, but it's your children that are going to be in that school. My grandchild is going to be in that school. I have legitimate concerns. I'm sure you do too. But please, don't stop. Keep going. I have a former student of mine sitting on the school board now, and he knows one of the things I told the kids was they were never allowed to use the word can't. In fact, they had to write it on a piece of paper. We went out in the field and buried it in the backyard. They were not allowed to use the word can't, and they weren't allowed to use the word nice, because nice doesn't tell you what things do. So, for those of you in the audience, don't let anybody tell you you can't, because yes, you can. And as my son used to make a post-it for my mom when she was ill, and it said, yes, I can, yes, I will. And she had it hanging on her wall till the day she passed away. So just remember, yes, you can, yes, you will. Thank you.
Tonight, and I do appreciate the respect that you have shown in delivering your message to the Board of Education. One of the items that we spoke about before the meeting tonight was that we received a number of emails from members of the community who are not willing to speak in public. And we want to invite the rest of the community that if you do have something that you want us to be aware of, please send an email. Please, even if you want to jot down a note and leave it with the district clerk here tonight. We are in the process of putting together a full question-answer about all the situations here that we're experiencing in evaluating the issues around Crampy alone. And we don't want to let anyone's issues go unnoticed. So if you do have additional information, or if you haven't spoken, if you're not, many people are unwilling to speak in public, please make sure you get that information to us. I assure you that we are reading each and every one of them. Thank you very much. Next on the agenda is item F1, the School Board of Education Liaisons. These items people will go through very quickly, and then we'll get to the presentation by the consultant, just to give you an idea of how our agenda is going to move. Okay? Superintendent.
Okay, so the first item is for the board to determine the Board of Education School Liaison representatives for the 2017-18 school year. Representatives serve as liaisons between the Board of Education and the PTA and the school principal. Current trustees and for the last school year are listed on the agenda. I know we have 2 trustees missing this evening. generally they
Yes, we do, don't we? Chris, where's Mr. Puccini?
I know we have
Interesting. Doesn't want to. Who's the other person? I don't know. Carol. Carol.
You were going to ask for procurement anyway? Okay, and that's the one that's available now. Does anybody have an interest in changing? You have two? Oh, you're there.
But I'd be more than happy to.
We can't hear you. Talking to the mic. We can't hear you. Talking to the mic.
We also have Miss Malin and Mr. Santo at the middle school now. Mr. Santo, are you interested in keeping or
Well, I honestly
That's it, from next time? And I would like the middle school.
No, because that's
Oh,
because there's two at the middle school now. We need two at the high
Okay.
school, one at every one.
okay, so Brookhaven Elementary.
So Brookhaven.
No. We're not going to do that to the new guy. Or I'll take it. Why don't we both take it? All right, Ms. Hunt and myself will take Frank Pilon. We'll make an exception for two there as well. That would leave Kramer open as the other elementary school, and maybe Mr. Nix, you'd like to start there. Okay. I will still go to the Kramer School concerts because I did love them. Okay. So that leaves Mr. Puccini at Vernon Fritz. Okay.
Okay, so high school, Mrs. Hunt, you're staying at the high school also, right? Ms. Hunt and Santo, middle school, Mrs. Mallon, Frankie, Mrs. Hunt, and Mrs. Brookhaven, Dr. Griffin, Kramer, Mr. Nix, and Rick, Mrs. Chi. Is that right? Moving on to the next item of discussion, the board retreat. The board needs to determine a date and time to have that retreat. The board may wish to consider holding one or more mini retreats this school year instead of the previous weekend format, possibly a morning or evening for 3 hours.
Treat is so much more important than the FPL results. What do you mean? They say $75 per person. They don't post it on the board that notes. They hire someone to do it, to give the presentation. They neglected that cost somewhere. To look that up again.
The third item is a special meeting. The board will discuss and determine the date for a special meeting to hear the final testing results as a result of the Franklin issue. We were considering Wednesday, August 16th. I don't know if that's possible.
Why?
That's one trustee indicated they could.
Why do we have to have another meeting?
The results will come in and we'll make a decision at August 16th. I don't think so.
But do you have a preference?
The decision's going to be no decision.
Why not make it September 16th?
7:30?
Another month?
Yeah. Make it September 16th.
We'll get that notice out.
It's ridiculous.
Okay, and the last item for discussion this evening, we have some preliminary testing results from the testing that has been completed at Franklin Law. And I would like to introduce district consultant, Mr. Glenn Schwenker, and his presentation.
No, I mean stop doing that.
And this presentation will be available on our website tomorrow.
Good evening, everyone. Concerned parents and citizens.
This presentation will be both a bit of a background about some of the constituents under investigation, as well as a bit of a history about the testing that's taking place at Frank P. Long.
Before you continue, can everyone hear the speaker in the back? I didn't think so.
Can you hear me now?
You have to speak directly to the top.
That's too tall for the microphone, so I'll hold it. So, to answer the question, first of all, who the heck is this guy that's talking? I was told to put together a slide that looks something like this. And I would just kind of call out that we've been doing in bioscience a number of high-profile investigations. I've had the opportunity to work with Adrian at the Roberto Clemente Park, which was the site of massive illegal dumping that was coordinated by a number of contractors and investigated by the District Attorney's Office. I am a licensed professional geologist, and most importantly, I'd like to introduce that I've done hundreds of investigations in school buildings. I'd like to put some of what I've heard in context. Now that said, I sat at the table and I was ready to go and plow through my presentation and just present data and facts. I'm going to continue to do that, but I did hear a lot of what was said. I'm going to try to address compassionately both some of the emotion as well as some of the technical questions that were posed by the audience. Let's move ahead because this slide's embarrassing. A little bit of background. Frank P. Long was a structure that was built in 1957. I've heard from a number of you in the community about having attended kindergarten there and graduated there, and these were great stories. And it is worth pointing out that Frank P. Long, formerly known as the Hampton Avenue School, existed prior to the commissioning of the landfill, which took place in 1972. Frank P. Long is about 0.67 miles. That's a really bad slide that shows the southeast corner of the landfill, and as the crow flies to Frank P. Long, a little over half a mile is the airborne distance between the two locations. Now, just a little bit, just take a step back to tell the board that while our discussion and focus has been the impact of the landfill on the school, our investigation took it to the highest level to say we're going to do an assessment of the school that includes the potential impact of the landfill on the school so as to not exclude any potential concerns or issues that might exist within the building. That said, with respect to the landfill, there are really two pathways by which the landfill can influence the building. The first is groundwater, and the second is climatically through wind. Let's talk about the groundwater first of all, just as a refresher for some people. All of the water that we get on Long Island is the result of water that we obtain from our sole source aquifer. It's hundreds and hundreds of feet below the what we refer to as the water table, but of great concern is the fact that about 95% of the water that winds up in the aquifer percolates through the ground as a result of the rain that falls on Long Island. We have very little runoff. We're basically a real big sand dune, and the water finds its way into the water table quite quickly. The other thing to know about the water table is that the water moves in directions that are predictable and measurable, and in the case of the water direction at Frank P. Long and its relationship to the landfill, the general direction of groundwater flow is southeast in this area. It moves at about 1.1 foot per day, so it's as water moves pretty quick. I want you to notice that when plotted on a groundwater flow direction chart, that the influence of the groundwater is not from Frank P. Long itself. It doesn't impact Frank P. Long itself, but that influence is more to the southeast, and this was verified in a number of studies going back to 1988 by the USGS Geologic Survey, and then confirmed more recently by an engineering firm on the island of Bartolucci. So the groundwater influence on Frank P. Long comes from a position that is west of the landfill, and that's a good thing if we're concerned about its impact. It was discovered in the late 80s that the lining of the landfill was beginning to fail, and there were some contaminants that existed in the downstream component of the groundwater. It's one of the reasons why this area remains undeveloped today as it is remediated. The other thing we need to concern ourselves about is the historic wind direction. When we say historic, we don't mean back to the Civil War. We're talking about the amount of wind direction and speed that we can measure accurately through day-to-day monitoring. And the agency that takes care of that is the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. And we use a tool called the wind rose to illustrate wind direction around a compass. And we use the peak of these petals of the rose, if you will, to assess direction and intensity of the wind. And fortunately, we were able to triangulate, if you look at this map, that the landfill is right about here in the middle, 3 data points. One is in Port Jefferson, one is a buoy about 20 miles or so south of Montauk Point, another buoy about 30 miles south of Islip. And we can look at that data and see historically, over the last 10 years at least, the wind speed and direction impacting Frank B. Long in the landfill. So the first wind rose is this one from Port Jefferson, and without diving into all the details, you can see that, I'll figure out the arrow button versus the laser button in a second, that the predominant direction of the wind is from the south and from the northwest. As many of you who might sail or boat on Gulf War Bay would know, this is predominantly the wind direction that we deal with as the day progresses, as the wind speeds pick up. And so this is not surprising to us. In Port Jeff, the wind on the North Shore is a little bit more from the south. In the Montauk wind rose, we see again a prevalence of the wind from the southwest and from the west-northwest. And in Islip, a similar scenario, southwest wind, and this is, like I said, both measured off the ocean. So we take this data, we try to compile it and reach a conclusion, and we see that the average percentage of the wind is about 2%, and so on. And really take-home message is the last 2 lines. The total percentage of all 4 directions that would influence Frank B. Long from the landfill, which would be the north-northeast direction, is about 13.5% or so. Meaning that 86% of the time, the wind is flowing from a direction that is not from the landfill. That's a good thing as well. We certainly wouldn't want to be under the influence if we didn't need to be. The next thing I want to talk about is a little bit of background about the different constituents that we are evaluating for. And there were a number that have been evaluated over time, and I've heard you speak about in your questions to the board. And so the first one I talk about is asbestos. Asbestos is a naturally occurring mineral. It's found on all 6 continents. There are 6 different mineral types, and it's been used in a variety of building applications. Thermal system insulations, surfacing materials, and other miscellaneous materials like floor tiles and ceiling tiles. The health concerns related to asbestos are primarily from inhalation, and they include asbestosis, lung cancer, and mesothelioma. So I'll go off the script a little bit now and just say that I heard a question about, I don't want to send my child to a building that contains asbestos. I've been doing asbestos consulting for 27 years. There are currently no buildings except for the new high school at Sachem and the new high school in Hampton Bays that do not have asbestos on Long Island in some form or shape. Most of that asbestos is tied up in floor tiles and in pipe insulations in hard-to-reach areas like pipe tunnels. But there are no buildings that do not contain asbestos, so that's just a little bit of context as far as that goes.
So that makes it okay.
The next parameter we tested for was mold. And mold these days gets a bad rap for a number of reasons. I'll address that in a second, but it's ubiquitous in nature. It means it's all around us. We don't live in environments that are sterile or free from mold, which are a catch-all term to describe a class of fungi. So, recently New York State passed regulations for standards for the assessment and remediation of mold. But those standards did not include standards for assessing types or concentrations. And so we make comparisons to assess whether or not space is impacted by mold. We address a number of those parameters. And it takes into account that there are individual sensitivities and varying health effects associated with exposures to different types of molds. Causes of elevated concentrations primarily are the presence of moisture in combination with a nutrient source, Excessive unfiltered outdoor air can lead to an accumulation of mold-spore contaminants, and poor housekeeping or custodial activities can also impact mold concentrations. Health effects from mold include things like being an asthmatic trigger, allergens, and I want to emphasize in very limited cases, respiratory-related infections and illnesses. We would refer to these as the toxic type of molds. Next parameter that we assessed was particulates. While I'll address again a comment that was made regarding particulates of the small size, the PM 2.5s, we assessed particles up to 10 microns in diameter, primarily because we wanted to make sure that we captured all potential types of dust and were able to compare them to a standard that was reasonable. We would not have expected to have seen particles 2.5 microns in diameter and less and gotten reliable and useful data. In other words, we probably would not have exceeded the detection limit for that method. Particles in this category include all particles that are not otherwise regulated, of which there are two types, asbestos and silica, and they include secondhand smoke and smoke from fires. Particulates health effects can include asthmatic triggers, allergens, and increases in other respiratory-related illnesses, and I would add also cardiac disease at very high concentrations over long periods of time. The next parameter that we were assessing as part of this comprehensive investigation are metals in air. This includes a number of metals that are listed under the DEC regulations under what are called Part 375. And while metals are essential to our metabolism in our bodies at low concentrations, toxicity at high concentrations can occur, especially if the exposure is either chronic or very acute. And a classic example of that would be lead, because people hear lots about lead poisoning. If your exposure is regular and chronic at low concentrations or acute at a high concentration for a short period of time, the effect on blood lead levels and the nervous system are often immediate. If you have any questions, just let me stop. The next parameter is hydrogen sulfide. Hydrogen sulfide is a byproduct of the bacterial breakdown of the waste at, in this case, our concern being the landfill. It's the rotten egg odor that is emanating from the landfill when you drive by or live in your home and the wind blows from the right direction. Hydrogen sulfide can be a mucous membrane irritant at a very moderate concentration, but chronic exposure can lead to headaches, fatigue, as it displaces oxygen within in the respiration process. It is also dose-dependent, meaning that we need to assess the duration and the acuity of the exposure to determine what the ultimate health effects could be. The next parameter we assessed was radon. Radon is a naturally occurring radioactive gas, meaning it's a byproduct of the breakdown of certain minerals and rocks within the geology of the region that we live. It's the #1 cause of lung cancer among non-smokers in the United States. It's primarily emitted into buildings through the soils from both water and also potentially from building materials that are natural in nature. It becomes trapped in basements and in rooms above grade and becomes a danger when it decays and is inhaled. The Environmental Protection Agency defines 3 zones throughout the United States where extensive assessment has been done on the concentration of radon, primarily in residential homes. It defines Zone 1 as a place where it is regularly observed that the concentration exceeds 4 picocuries per liter. Zone 2 between 2 and 4 picocuries per liter, and Zone 3 less than 2 picocuries per liter. Long Island is classified generically as a Zone 3. I will introduce that I have 2 buildings currently under our care for radon, where we have detected radon and developed a remediation system. Both of them exist in Nassau County. While I have touched on all these other compounds as being potential sources of issues related to health effects, by far the one receiving the most attention these days are volatile organic compounds. VOCs, as we refer to them, and their sisters, the semi-volatile organic compounds, are gases emitted from certain solids and liquids. Depending upon the compound of under investigation, it may have, at certain concentrations, short-term and long-term health effects. Generally, it's observed by EPA and by the New York State Department of Health that those concentrations can be 10 times higher indoors than outdoors. I'll explain why that might be in a moment. It should be pointed out that there are thousands of products that have VOCs. And the reason you might know this without even this presentation is that you've heard it advertised that a particular product contains low VOCs. And of course, the alternative to that advertisement is that the product contains VOCs. And so products like paint, solvents, and strippers, carpeting, dry cleaning clothing, printers, glues, etc., asphalt, driveway sealers, hairsprays, and perfumes all contain VOCs. Just a visual on some of the things that every day put you in contact with volatile organic compounds at some concentration.
Minimizing.
To further the point about putting in context the results that we obtained from Frank B. Long, I provided the district with results of VOC sampling that's been performed in other school buildings over the last year and a half.
I know.
And while I'm on this chart, I want to say that this chart is prepared by us as a summary of the compounds detected in sample analysis. And so there was a question about 1,2-dichloropropane having been identified in the testing performed in 2017, but why wasn't it tested for in 16 and 15? And that's a misinterpretation of the table. The table only identifies compounds that have been detected. If they were not detected, and that would be in the report that's the 40 or 50 pages that back up this table, then it doesn't show up in the table. But it doesn't mean that it wasn't assessed. So 1,2-dichloropropane, which was found in 17, was also evaluated at 16 or 15, and was not detected at any concentration.
We can't say it. He's wondering where it came from.
So I know you can't read this except to see some of the compounds that exist, like acetone.
Can't read it.
We can't read it.
Well, okay. I can say, trust me if you want, but I'll walk up there and read it if you like. But these are tables very similar to those produced as part of the various Frank P. Long investigations. There's chloride, there's chloromethane, there's acetone and benzene, and it looks really good on the MacBook Pro, but not so good on the screen.
But the letter that you signed for 2016 showed excessive amounts.
Ms. Bender, and for everybody else's information, this is a meeting of the Board of Education. The public portion is over. We're going to go through the report, and then we're going to allow another period of time in which you can ask questions of this report once all the reports are in. You will have that opportunity. Please let us get through this information. I also just want to take a minute to express to you some of the drawbacks for the board on reviewing this information because of the open meeting law and the restrictions to it. This board is not able to meet unless it's in a public forum on matters of public session, which this is. So this is the first time we are seeing this information as a board. We did receive the slideshows ahead of the meeting, but to hear from our consultant, we can't do that without you present.
I understand.
And
It's just a false statement. It's a false statement.
We understand your concerns, and we've
False
already said,
statement.
if you have additional concerns, write them down, get them to us. Many of you in this office, in this audience, know my email. And you know the superintendent's email, so get it to us. But we're going to continue with the presentation so that the board can have it as it's been compiled. Thank you.
Further discussion about VOCs, each individual compound has a specific associated risk, and this risk has been identified by agencies like NIOSH, OSHA, and the CDC for decades, and refined as more epidemiological data becomes available. There's no standard that currently exists for total volatile organic compounds, and it is because of the individual risks associated with each of those compounds. Collectively, we call them a class of VOCs, but they have varying health risks associated with them. All governmental agencies also recognize the existence of background levels of VOCs, and this is very important because I've heard comments related to this particular compound being present in the school at any concentration is enough of a reason for me not to send a child to that school. And while I respect that perspective, you don't need to take it from me to understand that the government recognizes that there are a suite of VOCs at different background levels that we have come to live with. And this was validated as recently in 2006 when the New York State Department of Health released a study called Soil Vapor Intrusion Guidance. This was a study of over 4,000 homes throughout New York State that were predominantly heated with heating oil. And while it's not a regulation, it is a document that the State Department of Environmental Conservation uses to assess the intrusion of soil vapors as a result of contaminated soil or water beneath a structure that might require remediation. And we use within that report a table that includes a 95th percentile value for each individual volatile organic compound. And those are the comparisons that you see in the tables that you've read about in Frank P. Long's report and the bad ones that you couldn't read on the previous slide. So I'll make it clear two things. It's not a regulation, it's not a speed limit, it's not if you go above this, then you must do this, and if it's below this, then you're okay. But a regulator has the ability from a guideline to results and to reach conclusions.
It's convenient. Yeah, it is.
I want to reiterate further that the document states in paragraph form that exposure to a VOC due to vapor intrusion does not necessarily mean that a health effect will occur. That it is dose dependent as well as the frequency of exposure and the toxicity of each individual volatile chemical and that individual's sensitivity to the chemical. Okay. So this is an issue that I want to address that has been the source of some troubling interpretation of our reports over the last 2 years. In 2015 and 2016, EnviroScience used a very conservative guidance value in comparing outside concentrations. Everything we talked about earlier, soil vapor intrusion is an indoor assessment. We were using annual guideline concentrations from the Department of Environmental Conservation in comparing outside samples to the results that we obtained. And it wasn't until a meeting that was held this year at the DEC's office in Stony Brook with South Country administrators and myself that the DEC said that we should not be applying that evaluation to the samples that we've been collecting. And in fact, the DEC was using this short-term guideline concentration, or SGC, in evaluating the quality of the air in the neighborhoods surrounding the landfill. And that the AGC guideline only applies to samples taken at the landfill, where this exposure is chronic and long-term. And this goes back to the illustration of the exposure being more diversified through the wind direction and through the groundwater migration. So, I want to just plant this seed in your head as we look at some of the results of some of the testing that we did moving forward and make two comparisons. Our relationship with the South Country School District began on July 8th, 2015. I preface that by saying that I used to be a principal at a firm called North Atlantic Laboratories, and if you've been in this district for a long time, you know that there was a period in the late 1990s doing investigations regarding air quality. But since 2015, we've been retained by the district to conduct this air sampling. At that time, the administration and the Bellport Teachers Association leadership sat down together to discuss their health concerns and results of some historic sampling that had been performed at Frank P. Long. As an outcome of that meeting, we developed a proposal that addressed, in concert with the Teachers Association, a number of concerns. One was to conduct VOC sampling within the air and the soil at locations that were specified by BTA as areas of concern. Mold sampling, to conduct conduct what's called a Phase 1 environmental site assessment. I'll talk about that in a second, what that entails. And that we would be performing the next asbestos 6-month surveillance. Asbestos is required to be inspected in schools every 6 months to determine if there's been a change in the condition of that material. The BTA approved all the contents of our proposal once we submitted it to the district, and further, using their independent environmental consultant, the New York Committee for Occupational Safety and Health, concurred that the contents and methodologies to be used would be appropriate in addressing their concerns. In late July of 2015, as part of the first process of that proposal, we began the asbestos 6-month surveillance. We discovered a pipe elbow in the rear mechanical room at Frank P. Long that was damaged, and about 200 feet of damaged pipe insulation within the basement. Both of those conditions were abated through the process of removing the material, and a final air clearance was achieved prior to the opening of the school in September of 2015. On November 4th of 2015, we undertook the mold sampling inspection that was requested. 24 locations were assessed, and as an outcome of those 24 locations, we identified 4 locations within the building requiring attention because of the presence of some elevated spore counts. Further, through an investigation of the unit ventilators within the school, we made the recommendation to replace all the air filters within the unit ventilators on a regular preventative maintenance schedule. And that is a further recommendation that all those units be hygienically serviced. The heating of the school is performed through a unit that sits along the window wall of each classroom. That unit provides heat in conjunction with fresh air, because there's a fresh air intake on the outside of them. Those units do not provide air conditioning. In units where there has been a request from the Committee on Special Education to place an air conditioner, they exist, but that's the exception, not the rule. And there's air conditioning also, if I'm not mistaken, in the library, in the computer room, and in the administrative part of the building. But all instructional spaces primarily are serviced by unit ventilators that only provide heat and fresh air.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Sure.
Way to clarify. So no air is circulated or recirculated from the basement of the building?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay. On November 24th, 2015, we prepared a report entitled Phase 1 Environmental Site Assessment. As a primer as to what a Phase 1 is. Primarily, any time real estate is transferred from one party to another and a bank or an insurance company is involved, they will request an environmental site assessment be performed on the property. That assessment includes an evaluation of the current use of the facility in the property, in this case it was a school, to see if any environmental conditions existed that could be detrimental and costly to the remediation of the property. We evaluate the historical use of the property to see if there was a past use that might have impacted. In other words, hypothetically, was there a refinery or a gas station that was on this property, and through that investigation the property was undeveloped for a period of at least 100 years before the school was built. We evaluate the surrounding property's use to see if there have been any spills or other events that have led to contamination of soil or groundwater within the area, and we evaluate the spills database provided by each of those agencies. There were no recognized environmental conditions identified in that Phase 1 to the extent that that is what it assesses. On October 28th, we conducted soil sampling in 2 locations. Both of those locations were requested by the Bellport Teachers Association. One was in the courtyard, and I'll refine the slide to say that specifically it was outside room 106 because that question came up today. And one was collected in the basement. And there were no exceedances to the DEC soil cleanup objectives. What is that? When we have contamination identified through a spill or through illegal dumping or whatever the case may be, the DEC required that material be remediated until we reach the point where the soil meets certain cleanup objectives. And so that comparison is what we used to evaluate the soil from each of those two samples. On December 3rd, 2015, we conducted BOC sampling in 12 locations requested by the BTA as areas of concern, including 9 indoor locations and 3 outdoor locations. The results of all of those samples in student-occupied areas were normal. I'm going to use normal to be a term that used to describe comparison to the 95th percentile of the soil vapor intrusion table. We had one basement location that was elevated for tetrahydrofuran, 13 micrograms per cubic meter versus 9.4 as a guidance value. And that compound is commonly found in pesticides. And here I'm going to ask you to remember the slide that I talked about where we compared annual guideline concentrations to short-term guideline concentrations. And instead of refining the reports that were generated post the DEC meeting of 2017 in May when they said don't use the AGCs, use the SGCs, we didn't revise it, and so that compound remains listed as an outlier even though if methyl chloride and the tetrahydrofuran were compared to the SGC, neither one would be an exceedance. And there you see those two values, 14,000 and 30,000 respectively. That's an important concept because that's the criteria that the DEC is using to assess the neighboring properties around the landfill. In March of 2016, administration and EnviroScience met with the Gulfport Teachers Association to again discuss concerns regarding both past tests that have been performed and new concerns about health. And they may request for further testing and identify the locations for that testing. Following that meeting, we had a meeting with the DEC on March 29th. And there we were told for the first time that, and I'll say that the purpose of that meeting was to discuss the landfill and the sampling that we had performed as well as the sampling that had been performed by the DEC. For the first time we were told that there was active monitoring taking place around the landfill with a number of different entities, including the teachers at Frank P. Long, who were given suma canisters by the DEC, as well as suma canisters placed by concerned residents within the community at Martha Avenue Park and the fire department as well. As a result of this meeting, we were told that the outcome of all of that sampling was that results were elevated for hydrogen sulfide in 2 locations over 8 months of sampling. As another outcome of that meeting, it was determined and decided that the DEC and the town of Brookhaven had agreed to an accelerated landfill closure program. Prior to the previous 6 months of this, leading up to that meeting, the town was on a program that included a 7-year winding down of the landfill to its ultimate closure. The DEC requested, the town provided, and the DEC then approved the installation of 20 additional gas extraction wells, primarily to capture hydrogen sulfide as it migrated off the landfill site, and a capping of additional landfill quadrants to the southwest side in an attempt to reduce odor emissions. I would say that if you take a look at the landfill on these days, who doesn't? You would see that the character of the landfill has changed from one that was a sandy hill to one that is now a vegetated hill. It's green in nature, and that is a result of the capping program on this side of the landfill.
It's green. Green is red.
The DEC and the administration agreed to share data as each received it for any investigations performed going forward. On June 8, 2016, EnviroScience conducted mold sampling in 24 locations, 23 indoors and 1 outdoors, and VOC sampling in an additional 14 locations identified by BTA as areas of concern. Those included 9 indoors and 5 outdoors. Mold results were normal, Indoor student-occupied VOCs were normal. Outdoor VOCs initially reported, I'm going to go back to this AGC, SGC comparison again, the presence of benzene at a concentration of 0.45 micrograms per cubic meter. We compared that to a value in our report that I believe somebody probably has it, but it's like a 0.3 number or something like that. And we're told not to compare it to the AGC value, but instead to the SGC value, which is 1,300 micrograms per cubic meter. So using the same comparative tools that the DEC uses, benzene would not be an outlier in our report, but we left it in for the purposes of being able to illustrate it in this presentation. On May 3rd of this year, we performed a duplication of the sampling for VOCs performed in 2016 in all 14 identical locations. Again, all indoor student-occupied locations were within guidance values. All the outdoor locations were within the newly evaluated semi-annual or SGC concentrations. And we found 1,2-dichloropropane in an area within the basement crawl space. Back to your point, Board President, about the mixing of the downstairs air with the upstairs air in concentration, in connection with having evaluated the upstairs spaces and not seen 1,2-dichloropropane in the indoor student-occupied spaces. It was recommended to the district to further delineate the presence of that material so that it could then be remediated and removed, and we're in the process of doing just that. On May 31st, the Administration of Bioscience met with the DEC to review the latest developments of Brookhaven landfill and data from FPL sampling. The DEC stated to us that the additional capping had been completed. Brookhaven Town had spent about $8 million unbudgeted ahead of schedule to perform that and the gas well extraction installation. They advised us at this meeting, as I just pointed out, that we should be using the SGCs and not the AGCs. They also told us that there were plans to hold meetings with various community groups, and in the future they would extend those invitations to the school district as the school wished to be a party to that and share in the status of the findings as they became available. The DEC also indicated that they were going to install a hydrogen sulfide monitor at Frank B. Long to monitor air in real time. It should be pointed out that that monitor assesses hydrogen sulfide concentrations of parts per million. The hydrogen sulfide testing that we've been doing the last 2 weeks will be reported in parts per billion. The standard is in parts per million, but and that was installed on June 22nd. It's operational as of today. Kind of whisper numbers. The state downloads the data on a weekly basis to Stony Brook, then sends it up to Albany to be evaluated. And we were told that the first week's numbers had no detections of hydrogen sulfide. On June 15th of this year, there was a discovery of less than 1 square foot of mold growth within room 14. This growth was likely the result of a continuing problem that exists within the building regarding leaking windows. While I'm not an architect, I've investigated lots of issues regarding moisture infiltration, and my semi-professional opinion is that the masonry around the windows is failing. That allows for the infiltration of rain into the framing of the windows. These windows are aluminum frame windows, extruded aluminum frame windows, that then allows water to accumulate on the sill at the bottom of the window. We noticed that in doing a moisture survey assessment of the area where the mold occurred. Regardless, the area was treated by the custodial staff as is permitted by law using their customary cleaners. We did perform air sampling in the room, and we found elevated levels. And I want to put that in context. We found concentrations that I would say were slightly elevated, but elevated is elevated. And there was no visible remaining microbial growth. We made a recommendation to the facilities, people, and administration that given there were only a day or two left in the school year, that upon completion of the school year, that space receive additional vacuuming and sanitizing. and that we would assess by testing that room prior to the reopening to ensure that was effective. To answer the question whether that took place, it did not, because at the last board meeting, there was a discussion about and a decision to perform additional environmental investigative tests at Frank P. Law, including all of the parameters that I discussed earlier, with the addition of groundwater sampling and analysis. On July 6th, the day following our board meeting, we made the recommendation to the administration that they stop all summer cleaning activities. The building had undergone about 3 or 4 days of the traditional moving of the materials into the hallways. They had begun in a number of classrooms to strip the floors and apply floor finish and other activities that would generate additional particulate. We wanted to be able to evaluate the building as closely as possible under normal conditions without the influence of things like cleaning activities that might include compounds that contain VOCs. That stoppage took place on the 6th and lasted until July 21st, the last day of our sampling. To give you a timeline of the sampling that took place within the building, you see all the dates here. Asbestos sampling was performed on the 11th, as was mold, total particulate, and so on down the line. 2 comments to make about this. There was a comment made earlier about assessing the building using prevailing wind conditions. Given the broad spectrum of all of the parameters that were going to be assessed, we didn't have the luxury of being able to pick and choose days where the wind would have been, quote, in our favor, so to speak. That said, a number of these contaminants are not weather dependent, and so that concern kind of goes out the window. And with regards to VOCs, that sample was performed on a day where the prevailing wind was from the northeast. Groundwater wells were installed on July 19th and 20th. Those wells need to be developed. That just means they need to settle, they need to be screened, we need to make some calculations with regards to depth. That took place today. And groundwater sampling will be performed on Monday, July 31st. This is what led us to developing a special board meeting that will take place on August 16th. At that time, we intend to have results of all of this sampling completed. So,
oh dear Lord.
I'm just going to say from a breadth and quantity perspective, this investigation in my years and in the years that I've been working in schools is the most comprehensive investigation that's ever been performed on a school building, certainly on Long Island and probably in New York State. And what I mean by that is the concentration of all the tests that we just showed in the previous slide, and more importantly, the evaluation of every functional space within the school building. It would normally be unprecedented to test rooms, for instance, when the concern is systemic, to test spaces that adjoin each other. But in an effort to leave no stone unturned, we are assessing every room. And so you will see in our sample reports as they become developed that every sample location is identified by a number and it corresponds to locations in this chart. If you can't read it, it'll be clearer when the report comes out. But I would venture to say that the only things that we didn't test were storage closets and bathrooms. That's a really bad drawing that shows that the entire building was assessed and each of the sample numbers corresponds to the functional spaces. And that was the sample locations for each of those parameters: asbestos, mold, particulates, metals, hydrogen sulfide, and VOCs. Additionally, we assess radon primarily in the space that comes most in contact with the soil surrounding the building. And so for the first 20 locations identified there, that is within the basement. And in the rear of the building, where there is no basement and the classrooms sit on a slab, those 5 samples were taken within the student space. functional space identified there. It's another drawing that's hard to read, but you'll see in the report showing each of those locations for radon. Oops. Lastly, we installed the 3 groundwater well locations, and here you can see where they are. They represent the direct line between Frank P. Long and the landfill. That's a compromise between the understood groundwater flow direction, which is northwest to southeast, and what influence might exist on the building as a result of groundwater flow. So if you remember that slide I showed in the beginning, to find groundwater as a result of the migration from the landfill, we'd have to go onto property that is not Frank P. Long. And so, given the groundwater flow direction in this location, those wells represent the water's impact on the building under the worst case scenario. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. So we have some results to date to share because some sample analysis takes less time than others. Asbestos was, again, sampled in each of those 69 locations. The comparison was made to the Asbestos Hazard Emergency Response Act clearance level of 70 fibers per square millimeter. And additionally, a comparison was made to the permissible exposure limit of 0.1 fibers per cc contained in OSHA. And I'm happy to say that there were no asbestos fibers found in any of the 69 sample locations. The detection limit of the method is less than 0.0042 fibers per cc. The next parameter for which we have results is mold. I want to reiterate that there's no regulatory standard under which we would say that mold passes or fails. The comparison is made to the outside concentrations and the constituents. I want to reiterate that spore counts are accumulative indoors, meaning that if a space goes without custodial activities and you are introducing outside air, that spore counts will rise as time goes on. But outdoors, they're dynamic. As the wind shifts, spores move from one place to another, and you take a sample outside that is representative of the concentration at that time outside, but the counts inside are a cumulative count. So on the day of testing, we had an outdoor concentration that ranged from about 6,400 to a little over 20,000 spores per cubic meter. And those constituents were primarily basidiospores and cladosporium. Basidiospores are spores that are related to primarily mushroom growth, puffballs that you might find in the woods, and cladosporium, the decay of rotting leaves and wood. In all locations within Frank P. Long, the results were less than 2,300 spores per cubic meter, and in fact, 75% of those results were less than 1,000 spores per cubic meter, except in the kitchen serving line and the cafeteria, which unfortunately the doors were open at the time of the sampling. Those organism profiles, though, were the same outdoors as indoors, basidiospores and cladosporium. Our recommendation will be that prior to the opening of school, under a scenario where the school might open, that the kitchen serving line, the cafeteria, be reassessed following summer cleaning to ensure that we have levels that are acceptable.
That's disgusting.
Next results we have are radon. The criteria that we use are those extensively developed by the Environmental Protection Agency that uses a grouping of results to determine an outcome. For results less than 2, we have no action required, and in fact the EPA would say that reducing levels to below 2 picocuries per liter is difficult to achieve. And then a range of 2 to 4 where the EPA says consider remediation, which would be to evacuate the air in the basement from the building before it has an opportunity to impact occupied spaces. And the results were greater than 4, remediation is recommended. We obtained 69 results from Frank P. Long, and all results are below 1.1, including 85% of the results being less than 0.8 picocuries per liter. The last result that we have at this time is for particulates not otherwise regulated. This is commonly referred to by OSHA as nuisance dust. And that particular the standard 29 CFR 1910-1000 that establishes a permissible exposure limit over an 8-hour time-weighted period of 15 milligrams per cubic meter. The results that we obtained at Frank P. Long were all less than or equal to 2.0 milligrams per cubic meter, of which 65% were below detectable limits. The results that are still pending include metals in air, VOCs in air, hydrogen sulfide in air, and VOCs, SVOCs, metals, and pesticides in groundwater. So that's all that I have as far as the presentation today. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Questions of the Board of Education? Yes,
Question about the canisters.
could you just make sure you use the mic?
I'm sorry. Question about the canisters. They were used for 1 hour, not 8 hours. Is that true? That's correct. And what impact would that have on your findings if they were used for only 1 hour as opposed to 8 hours or 24 hours?
Thanks for reminding me. That was something I wanted to address. So every analysis and sample collection process follows a standard methodology. The methodology for collecting what we would call a grab sample or a supercanister sample is fixed for flow rate and volume. The flow rate is given at 1.6 liters per minute. The volume is 1.6 liters per minute times 60 minutes, or approximately 72 liters of air that need to be collected. If the flow rate or the volume is less, then the result is not considered acceptable. I can go into why. I'll just say that if the flow rate is too low, you run the risk of having an exchange back and forth between the canister and the surrounding air, and that's not desirable. You want to be able to grab all the air without then releasing any. And so that parameter, that methodology is for 1 hour. It's very simple for us, just like I showed in the previous slide. OSHA uses time-weighted averages all the time to then take that concentration over the 1 hour period and extrapolate it to an 8-hour time-weighted average. And so to take it for a longer period of time is not permitted and not necessary, and in fact has inherent risks. I would also add that given that we're so focused on VOCs primarily being the result of contaminants from the landfill or other ambient sources, sampling for 1 hour or 8 hours doesn't have much statistical significance.
Next.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for coming. In regards to all of the within guidelines findings, while they may be within guidelines for adults, are you able to convert how they may affect children differently, seeing that they're still developing and a smaller body?
Yeah, that's a great question. So these samples were developed by epidemiologists within organizations like the Centers for Disease Control, OSHA, NIOSH, etc. I did hear someone say that they're under the influence of lobbyists, and while that may be the case for some of the more higher profile contaminants, historically, today, there's just too much scrutiny for allowing that to happen. Most PELs have been refined and have existed for a period of over 15 or 20 years and haven't seen much change. To answer your question with regards to whether or not they apply to spot populations like children or the general population, which would lump in both adults or children, it depends. For instance, the asbestos standards were first written for schools and only applied to schools, and so their standards assessed the exposure potential to among portions of the population schools quite heavily. Others are occupational in nature. An example would be the one that's on the screen right now, particulates not otherwise regulated. This is an occupational assessment for obviously a population that's older, and so this would not be particularly applicable to children, except to say that the numbers that we were obtaining were significantly lower, and that's the only other guideline that we have to assess too. There isn't a separate class of guidelines for children where the exposure is assessed occupationally.
So in other words, this doesn't pertain to
Right. the sewer canisters that were placed also in North Avenue Park and the fire department, it states that the levels are elevated for hydrogen and sulfide. It says 2 locations. So what were the 2 locations located?
One was the fire department and one was Martha Avenue, as I recall. I'd have to go over there and look at a spreadsheet. But I think from my recollection, it was one at each location.
No, that's not my question. It says the results were elevated. So they were elevated at those 2 locations, or was it Frankie Long at another location?
No, it was not Frankie Long. It was Martha Avenue and the fire department.
Mr. Santa, do you have any other questions? I have a few questions, and then if you have more. On the last page where you talk about the code of particulates, and you refer to 65% below detectable limits, what about the other 35%?
They were less than 2 milligrams per cubic meter.
With respect to the radon results, there have been reports in the newspaper as of late of radon that have been that have been indeed disposed of in various landfills on Long Island. Those landfills have not been identified yet. Are you monitoring that situation very closely?
I'm aware of those reports. They actually extend further to some other locations, including Brookhaven Lab and a few others. While we can't speak as to whether or not there exists a radon problem at the landfill and the use of leachate and or treated water in the wetting process, we can only speak to the results that we obtained at Frank B. Long, and those results would be influenced by groundwater and soils surrounding Frank B. Long, and we don't have evidence that radon exists in the water and the soils around Frank B. Long, or we would see them in those indoor results.
A lot of our residents' concerns involve benzene, and you listed a number of issues. Could you just review? We know benzene comes from gasoline and fuel. The other items that benzene would come from. Could you just review that again?
Oh, sure. Well, benzene is ubiquitous VOC found in things like mineral spirits, acetones, nail polishes, floor finishes, paints that are oil-based.
Sharpie.
Sharpie, yes. Honestly, I mean, one of our
there's a car holding facility. Automobile holding facility, Copart, I believe the name is. It's just adjacent to Frank Long. Now, referring back to your earlier slide in the groundwater and the direction of the groundwater flows, this facility would be due east of Frank Long. So, if benzene, there's many cars there, so you have gasoline. If benzene is present on the Copart facility, what are the likelihoods of it emanating over to the Franklin Long section, based on the earlier slide that you said on the direction of the groundwater?
It's fingerprinting coming from the landfill. The state acknowledges
I want to answer your question first about you, and you said that location is east of Frank B. Long, correct?
Yes.
So I'm not going to be able to get the slide up in time to answer your question, except to say that the direction of groundwater flow is northwest to southeast, and so anything east of Frank B. Long would not influence Frank B. Long. Anything that would influence Frank B. Long would have to be north and west of Frank B. Long, which is the groundwater flow direction. And break another rule today. I actually received an email from a constituent in the community that was very thoughtful and addressed a concern about VOCs, and I answered it, and we had a nice discussion. And I'll answer this idea of fingerprinting. Benzene can't be fingerprinted. Benzene is benzene in...
Let's listen to the environmental.
Ms. Esposito, please. Ms. Esposito, if If you have a question, bring it up to the Board of Education.
There's not enough data that exists.
Ms. Esposito, please bring your concerns to the attention of the Board of Directors, of the Board of Education. Thank you.
The data that's been collected by the DEC at the landfill and in their surrounding assessments has not been conclusively identified as benzene coming from the landfill. That's what they told us in our meeting in May.
Are there any more questions of the consultant? Dr. Griffin?
Yes, a question that I haven't heard. I'm missing the methylene chloride. What was found elevated? What did you find with methylene chloride?
So, luckily enough, this slide right here shows that we compared methylene chloride originally to the HEC concentration, and it showed that it was elevated. When compared, and I think the HEC value is in the 10s. I can't remember exactly what it memorized. All of these different. But when compared to the SGC, the same comparison that DEC makes, the comparison is 14,000 versus 4.4. So if we were to revise our report, methyl chloride would not be considered elevated at this time.
Yeah, why would you revise it?
We were using a more conservative, I'm going to do this again. The annual guideline concentration is for chronic, long-term, daily exposure to a contaminant. Those values are inappropriate comparisons compared to the short-term, short-duration, episodic type of comparisons identified by the short-term concentration that the DEC themselves uses to evaluate the air in the properties around the landfill. They use AGC at the landfill where those concentrations exist on a daily basis.
Can you tell us when they made that change?
Yeah, we made that. We were told to make that change at our May 30th, 2017 meeting.
Are there any more questions of the Board of Education? I'd like to thank you very much for your presentation, and we look forward to your remaining results.
You said you could ask questions.
All right. I need to go for 10 minutes. All right.
We're going to be able to ask questions of this gentleman. As he said,
Yes, at the August 16th meeting.
Oh, you said today. Whoa.